kings and queens, princes and princesses. Oh my, it's time for another royal history hot tip. And today we are soaring into the skies, because today's hot tip is all about the divine departure of Prophet Elijah. Okay, so where did this story come from? Well, it comes from the Bible, specifically 2 Kings, chapter 2, verses 11 to 12. It reads, "And it came to pass as they still went on, that Elijah said unto Elisha, Stay here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said, But I will go with thee all the way. And he said, Tarry here, for the Lord hath sent me to Jericho. And he said, I will go with thee. And when they were gone over to Jericho, a chariot of fire and horses of fire came between them. And the horses did leap, and they went up to heaven in a whirlwind, and the fire came down and took him away. So now that we know where this story comes from, let's discuss what exactly happened here. So, as the story goes, Elijah and his servant Elisha were traveling together. They had been traveling together for some time because just a few verses before this, they were at Mount Carmel, and they just performed a huge miracle where they called down fire from heaven. And then, after that miracle, they set off to travel to Bethel. But while they are traveling, Elijah tells Elisha, Hey, you stay here for now. The Lord has sent me to Bethel. But Elisha says, No, I'm coming with you. Then they travel to Bethel, and then Elijah tells Elisha, All right, you stay here for now. The Lord has sent me to Jericho. But again, Elisha says, No, I'm coming with you. And then they travel to Jericho, and then the same thing happened. A chariot of fire and horses of fire came between them, and then those horses leapt up and took Elijah up to heaven in a whirlwind, and then fire came down and took him away. So there's some important things that happened here. First of all, this is an incredible story. So think about this. You have two men who are walking along, right? This is clearly not a mode of transportation that would have been available to normal people. So even getting a chariot was probably hard. But this wasn't any normal chariot. These were horses of fire. The chariot was made of fire. There was a whirlwind involved. Like this was not a normal thing. This was something super special, super unique, that only Elijah could receive. And it shows us that when Elijah left this world, he didn't leave it in a way that was common to man. He left in a glorious, spectacular, almost otherworldly manner. Now, some people might read this text and think, well, if Elijah left in such a spectacular way, why didn't Elisha also leave in a spectacular way? Why did he just get left behind? Well, I think the answer to that question is found in the text itself. When the chariot appears and is ready to take Elijah away, the text says that it appeared between them, meaning Elijah was in the front and Elisha was in the back. If you picture them standing next to each other, if the chariot of fire appears between them, then it makes sense that Elijah would be the one taken away and Elisha would be the one left behind. Not to mention the fact that God had specifically told Elijah, You stay here for now, I've sent you to Bethel, or you stay here for now, I've sent you to Jericho. Clearly, God was making it known that these were places where Elijah needed to be, and that he was not yet ready to go to heaven. So, for whatever reason, God chose to take Elijah and not Elisha at this time. The next important thing to note here is that the text says that the horses of fire leaped. Okay, the horses didn't walk or trot or gallop. They didn't do anything ordinary. They leapt. And that leaping reminds me of other times in Scripture where animals are described as doing extraordinary things. Like in Numbers chapter 24 verse 8 and 9, where Balaam, he's talking about the Israelites and he says, Behold, the people awake. That's Jacob, that he shall hiss that Israel shall be among the nations before him, and he shall be as a lioness whelp among the peoples. All of them he shall devour, and he shall destroy them. Yes, he shall devour and make an end of many nations. Here he's saying that Jacob, which is another name for Israel, shall hiss like a serpent. Now, serpents don't hiss in the way that we might imagine them hissing. We might think like SS is SSS, but they actually make a sound more like this. When they do that, it's called a concisive hiss. And that's when they basically spit venom out of their mouths, while they are making that sound. And what Balaam is saying here is that Israel shall speak, and the nations shall perish. They shall make a sound, and the nations shall be destroyed. So, I want you to think of that sound that I just made. Now think of a lion, think of a serpent, think of these amazing creatures who can do things that seem impossible. That's the kind of power that we see displayed here with these horses. These are no normal horses. These are horses of fire, horses that can do what seems impossible. And they leapt and they went up to heaven. Now, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul talks about being caught up into the third heaven. And he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 4, how that he was caught up into paradise and heard unspeakable words which it is not lawful for a man to utter. Many believe that this was a similar experience to what Elijah experienced here. That Paul was taken up to heaven in some kind of chariot of fire, some kind of horses of fire. So it's important to note that these kinds of experiences aren't unique to Elijah. Others in the Bible had similar experiences. The next thing that I want you to note here is that a whirlwind was involved in Elijah's departure. In fact, whirlwinds are mentioned several times in the Bible. In Job 28:8, whirlwinds also. He maketh them a wonder, and he vanquished them in the whirlwind. You think about a whirlwind, right? That's a powerful force of nature. And here it's used to carry Elijah away to heaven. The last thing that I want to point out here is that the text says that fire came down and took him away. So this is important because it shows us that Elijah wasn't taken away from this world in some gross, horrible, painful way. No, he was taken away in a holy, heavenly, beautiful way. He was taken away by fire. And I think that's significant because fire is used throughout Scripture to represent the presence of God. Think about when God came down to Mount Sinai, the ground was so hot that it was literally burnt up. Or think about when Solomon dedicated the temple. He offered sacrifices, and then fire came out of the midst of the altar and consumed the burnt offering and the fat. Or remember when Elijah called down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel. Fire is used to represent the glory of God, the power of God, the presence of God. And so for God to use fire to take Elijah away shows us that Elijah wasn't taken away in some ordinary way. No, he was taken away in a way that showed the glory and the majesty and the power of God. So what's the takeaway? What should we learn from this passage? Well, for one, I think we can learn that Elijah was a man who lived a life that was pleasing to God. Look at everything he accomplished. He was a man who fought against 450 prophets of Baal. He was a man who was able to call down fire from heaven. He was a man who was able to defeat Jezebel. This was a guy who lived a life for God, and he lived a life that pleased God. And because he lived a life that pleased God, God gave him an extraordinary departure. So I hope that we can learn from Elijah and that we can strive to live lives that are pleasing to God, so that God will be pleased with us. And when our time here on earth is done, that he will give us a glorious departure, not necessarily in a chariot of fire, but in a way that is glorious and heavenly and beautiful. Thank you all for joining me today for this Royal History Hot Tip. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and leave me a comment. Also, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode.